Oh, my thing? I changed battery. I'm on top of it. As long as I can remember what I'm talking about, right? All right, well, everybody, thanks for coming. I see a lot of faces I recognize from earlier today in the hallways. That's great. So if you went to John Liu's session or my earlier session, you saw some building blocks that are very useful to build things client-side. And in this session, what I want to do is show you some things that you can build up out of those building blocks. You know, sort of take those, I guess we sort of started with building blocks. We made some little rudimentary structures, but now let's see what we can do that's a little bit more involved and what kinds of things we can do to build some applications within SharePoint using entirely client-side techniques. So how many of you have built single-page applications before, SPAs? Okay. On SharePoint or? Not on SharePoint, okay. Yeah, I think it's a technique that's probably more familiar to people who are not working in SharePoint than SharePoint people, but I think that's changing. So let's see what we can figure out here. So I'll go through a few slides on this, but I'll be mostly doing demos, which usually makes people happy. Are we mostly a developer crowd in here today? Yep. All right, great. Any non-developers? And you would be a what? An admin, okay. So usually we have a couple admins, I said in my session earlier, who want to know what we're going to be doing to their servers, right? We're going to break things. The answer is no, like before. So, what is a single-page application? I think that, I think it's one of those things where you could get hung up on the definition. To me, it's this is from Wikipedia. So it's a single-page application or interface, and the goal is really providing a more fluid experience for the end user. SharePoint itself is actually moving toward what you might consider a single-page application, but it isn't really yet, and it probably really shouldn't be. So the idea is that in the browser, you sort of stay on a page, and stuff happens that, as you're taking actions, as you're getting things done on the page, you don't necessarily have to leave that page in order to accomplish the next step. That's really the basic idea. So why are single applications better? I mean, you get everything done in one place, right? You sort of feel like you can accomplish everything you need to do without going anywhere else. Sort of the older paradigm about computer systems is, you sort of have to know where to go to do each thing. And if you're old like me, you remember systems where you really had to know where to go because there was no sort of cue on the page. You'd have these weird abbreviations that you'd have to type in. A lot of airline systems, when they're going like this and they can't find your reservation, it's because they've got very strange navigational structures that they've got to follow and have memorized in order to be successful. So the idea here is that you can get everything done in one place. It's a very fluid user experience because it's all right there. Things change as the user is taking action, as they're clicking on something or typing something or sliding something. The page is reacting to that and adapting to show them the next thing that they need to do or other options that they may have. There are fewer page loads. So if you're a server-side programmer, you're used to sort of sending a big, relatively large page out to the user. They do some things in that page, and then the page comes back to you in order to take some action on the server. So I always think that feels sort of like a clunk, from a user standpoint. The post-spec model is a very clunky, sort of older method. And I talked earlier in my other session about how the consumer web has been, it's sort of become the paradigm that all of our users are thinking through. If they see something working really well on the consumer web, they see these single-page applications all the time. Why can't SharePoint be like that? Well, we can make it like that. Fewer page loads, more fluidity. So which one you know best? Probably Facebook, right? Everybody uses it. It's not single-page application all the time, but you spend a large portion of your time in that application on that one page. depending on which version you're looking at and sort of what, you know, when you go to different platforms, it varies from platform to platform. But, you know, you're scrolling, sort of an endless scroll to look at all of the content. You can go back as far as you want. You can, of course, click on something that brings it to the fore and makes it sort of the next single page that you've loaded. You can take a lot of actions there. But, you know, we're all familiar with that. So if you haven't really thought about what a single page application is, Facebook's not a bad example of what you can think about. There are a lot of websites out there, a lot of consumer based or business based websites that are great as single page applications. There's one that Asana is one that one of my clients was looking at. It's a really cool sort of task and work management thing, you know, very Web 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever the number is these days, where you just manage your tasks in a single interface. And I'll actually show you something that we came up with to sort of mirror what Asana does so that they would keep that content in SharePoint. So what is a single page application in SharePoint? Like I said, SharePoint sort of is too. There's a minimal download strategy, or MDS, in SharePoint 2013. And the goal of that is to try to send as little new content down when you switch pages as possible. And it makes it feel like you haven't really left the page. Now, MDS is something that a lot of people sort of feel like gets in the way, and so they turn it off. So you may or may not see this in your environment. But what happens with MDS, and it's primarily obvious in team sites, I think. Up on the URL, you'll see. I'll show you when we go into the demo. But the URL makes it obvious whether or not you're in MDS. And what happens is, you know, if you think about the whole SharePoint page, there's this pane right here is really where all the meat of the page is, right? Just like it's always been with other versions of SharePoint. But this stuff here, you know, the top stuff across the top and the stuff down the left tends to stay relatively constant while we're moving around. So what MDS does is it actually does the delta checks sort of on the server side. So it's a different way of architecting it. But the idea is that it only changes the parts of the page that need to change based on what you've just clicked on or selected or typed into. So for instance, if you click on one of these icons, you may only need to change this section of the page. So that's all that would come down. So all of that delta management stuff makes it feel much more like a single page application. And you get a little bit less of that feeling. And again, Internet Explorer tends to be where you feel it the most, where the page has disappeared and you've got this big white space and then it comes back. Even if it isn't a post back, you know, sometimes the page will do that. So that makes it feel a lot less fluid. With MDS, the sort of outer bands of things typically don't go away, and the inside of the content changes. So in essence, SharePoint is heading to a single page application-like architecture, if you've seen that. So I don't think single page applications have to be the whole page, right? I mean, to me, it's that you're keeping some working piece of the page constant. You know, in a sense, in a lot of ways, web parts were little single page application-lets, right? I mean, if we can do things in that little thing and they react to what we're doing, it's just that that part of the page is really not making us go somewhere else and come back. So to me, and it's probably not the classical definition, but I don't like definitions very much, as long as you're giving the user a space on the page where they can continue a workflow. They don't have to leave that page, or they don't have to go somewhere else or think about going somewhere else in order to make the work that they want to get done happen. Then to me, that's the single page application ethos, if nothing else. So, you know, in SharePoint, we see some examples. We have full screen provider hosted apps. So, you know, where basically the app takes over the entire page and you stay there. There's some of the apps in the App Store follow that model. I think some of the ones that you would feel that sort of react or feel better than the other ones. The main content area, like I had outlined in that previous slide, where it's just that part of the page only sort of stays constant while you're working. list views and forms. You know, if you think about going to the homepage, the default view of a list, if you're a good person at working with list views, that's actually like a single page application, right? I can filter on the headers, I can sort things, and so I can actually manipulate the data in theory without going anywhere, except that SharePoint tends to do postbacks when you make those filters, right? So if that minimal download strategy is on and it doesn't go away, it feels a lot more like a single page application, a spa. Web parts, you know, individual web parts, like I said, can sort of feel like a single page application. If it's just got a smaller sort of footprint, a smaller Chrome, but it still can be an application. You might be able to fill out your timesheet in one web part, for instance. As long as you can get everything done in that one little web part, that still feels to me like an SPA. Quick surveys actually is another good example. A lot of home pages on intranets, you know, you'll have a little survey, you know, how do you feel about the new HR benefits? And you have 3 options, and when you click it, then the little bar graph comes up, like the you don't have USA Today here, do you? USA Today, the paper in the United States, has a little silly little survey every day down on the bottom right. So it's sort of the same idea on an intranet homepage. So you know, you do all your interaction with it. Your interaction in that case, the whole idea of the application is to have you answer one question and then show you the results. But that's the lifespan of the application. So that's a single page application. Another thing that there, the last bullet, workflow actions brought into a list view. When you interact with workflows in SharePoint, it's just a very, very clunky experience, right? You know, you just start a workflow and you want to go see what's going on with it. You have to click the link to the workflow status. It takes you to another page. You may have to click a couple times from there to see what's going on. You can actually pull a lot of that information forward into that home page or into the list view page using several different techniques. I've done it with script, so that you can see what's going on. It changes over time as that workflow is running, and you can see the status without having to go anywhere. So again, that's sort of the single page application idea. It's a way to think about pulling content and activity forward into where the user is, as opposed to sending them off to see what's going on. Does that all make sense? Like I said, I don't like getting hung up on definitions a lot. I think that the key here is to try and make it feel more like a single place where you can get your work done, as opposed to trying to adhere to this specific definition. So what tools can we use? We obviously can use JavaScript and client-side tools, because that allows us to add behaviors to objects in the page. SharePoint pushes a lot of JavaScript down. A lot of the menuing and things like that is JavaScript driven in SharePoint. So it's not like this isn't going on in SharePoint, but we can push our own JavaScript down and override or add behaviors and actions and things like that SharePoint doesn't provide. We can do data access with AJAX, so that means we're reaching back into either the SharePoint server or some other server. You know, we could have a little weather app or a little calculator or something that reaches back into some other server in the company using AJAX that lets us put live data that we can interact with on the SharePoint page. And that's what AJAX is great for. And then additional libraries like jQuery, SP services can be helpful in the data layer. Client-side object model, I should have REST here. You know, actually REST isn't a library, so that's why it's not there. You know, some graphing tools, things like that. So, you know, the graphing tools is a great example where, you know, like with that little survey, we click something and then a little graph shows up. Maybe the bars sort of animate north or whatever, so that we feel like it's a very interactive experience. Graphing tools are nice because you can sort of a lot of times people are manipulating some sort of data, and the graphing, the visual can actually change in an animated way based on what they've just done. So there are a bunch of frameworks that people use typically to build these sorts of applications on the web. This is a case where another case where the sort of web development world is coming into SharePoint space as opposed to the other way around, or maybe we're just catching up. So a couple of the popular ones, and there are a lot of other ones, but these are sort of the main ones that people talk about these days. Knockout is great for data binding. I've talked to a lot of people about sort of, which of these frameworks is good for which sorts of things, and there seems to be relative consensus, but a lot of opinion as well. I've heard people say that Knockout is great for data binding, but not for single-page applications. I'll show you that I don't agree with that, because I'll show you a couple single-page applications that I use Knockout with, or at least one. AngularJS is the big popular one these days in the SharePoint space. I think because it's more comfortable for people who've worked with this MVC, that sort of the connection there. Again, I think it's a style and sort of. I guess sort of my applications tend to be more like this departmental kind of level as opposed to these ginormous enterprise class things. And I think Angular fits more in that enterprise class thing. Or something. Bootstrap, well, it's a responsive framework, also can be used as part of the toolkit for single-page applications because it provides you sort of the canvas that you can build things into. Durandal, which I never say right, is another framework that has been used for single-page applications. That framework is actually rolling into Angular. The guy who wrote Durandal has joined the Angular team. I'm not exactly sure what the time frame is there, but those two will sort of merge. So today I'm going to talk, the only one I'm going to cover is Knockout. I've been using Knockout for client projects for about 6 months now, and I love it. I mean, it lets me do some amazing stuff, and it allows me to do things that I've already been doing without writing as much of the stuff I had to write before, and it also makes it more adaptable. I can react more to changing requirements because of the way the data binding works. And so I'm finding that it's a very good tool set to use in SharePoint. So the pros and cons of using SP services. So the title of the thing said, SP services and single-page applications. SP services can be it can be the data layer. It can be the data access layer underneath a single-page application in SharePoint. You can also use REST. It really depends on what version of SharePoint you're working on. I've built some single-page applications in SharePoint 2007 recently. So it doesn't really matter what version you're working on. You're just bringing this thinking into that particular platform, okay? If you're on SharePoint 2013 and all you're really doing is writing to and from lists, then probably using REST would make good sense. I'm going to show you the way I'm architecting things these days that will probably help you as you sort of move from potentially using SP services to only REST. At least a way to start thinking about how you build things so that it'll make it a little bit easier to move forward. So a good thing about using some of the good things about using SP services is it's sort of lightweight from a data access standpoint. I think it's lighter weight than CSOM, at least it feels that way to most people. REST is good, but it doesn't cover as much. The cross-version compatibility thing I think is great. The fact that you can use SP services to build applications in 2007 and 2013, and they move very easily across that version spectrum is, I think, a very good thing. Good community support means I'll probably answer your question if you ask it in the discussions on the forums. But there are a lot of other people who are very interested in using SP services, so there are a lot of blog posts out there and a lot of information about how you can do these things. And then it can be used in tandem, like I said, as a data access layer with some of these other frameworks, these heavier things that give you bigger, sort of more capability. So some of the cons of using SP services in there is if you're on 2013, the SOAP web services have been deprecated. I always feel like I have to say that so that no one says, but you never told me that. So it's something to keep in mind. Deprecated from a Microsoft perspective doesn't necessarily mean anything. It means they have the right to make it go away at some point. SharePoint Designer still uses the SOAP web services under the covers, so I don't know how long that's going to take before it goes away. And it doesn't offer as much as some of the heavier frameworks. For instance, Andrew Connell has worked with a team that uses has built an open source framework called Breeze. It's a data entity framework, so it's a bit more. There's quite a bit more to it than what I give you with SP services. And that slides well under Angular. So, Angular with Breeze is the data entity, data access layer, and we're going into SharePoint's REST services is what Andrew's been focusing on. So Breeze is a heavier duty thing, and it may give you capabilities that you want that the SP services data access layer would. So everything always comes down to requirements, right? And it depends. The consultant's favorite phrase. All right, so that's enough slides, right? So I'm going to show you two applications today. One is a demo application, and one is a so-called real application, okay? Let me just get the right things up here. Any resolution changes, everything changes. All right. That's spoon.net. I use spoon.net for testing. If you ever have to test in multiple browsers, you should take a look at spoon.net. There's a little plug for a product right there. I get nothing from them, but it's really a good product. All right, so I built, this is a very simple little application, okay? I'm trying to jam it onto one screen here so that you can sort of get the idea. It hopefully will show you the concept of a single page application. I don't know about here in Australia, but at home in the US, we have what's called public television. And public television means that they come on about an hour every week at least and ask you for money a lot, right? So they have these big fund drives and they call you up, or they're user-funded television, okay? So they have these big fund drives, and I've worked on some fund drives over the years, and basically what happens is, they talk to somebody, they make a pledge, and then somebody sort of follows up on it, right? So the idea here is that we're going to run a little bit of a fundraising effort, and we're going to have a whole lot of people on the phones taking calls, and they're going to capture the pledges. This is the pledges list over here that people make. And then we have a dashboard over on this side where people who are doing the follow-up are going to take action based on what pledges have come in. So it's a very simple example. I don't run through all the use cases on this, but it sort of gives you a little bit of an example of something that could be thought of as a single page application. Is that my cord, or is that? Hopefully that'll stay. Okay. So on this side, we can create new pledges. Okay. So I'm just going to edit this list so that I can add one. Paul McCartney just called, and he pledged $1,000 because he's a very generous guy. And I'm just going to stop editing that list. That's already saved. Now, if you watch on the other side, on this side, that pledge showed up, right? So the people sitting over here are just going to automatically start seeing things come up, right? So this application on this side is it's acting in real time. It's just going to sit there and keep showing you new things as they happen. Now that, it's not a big deal, but SharePoint doesn't just do that for you, right? I mean, we've got two different browser windows here opened up. We'd have a lot of people typing in these pledges, and they'd be showing up in this sort of stream of data that would show you all the pledges as they're coming in. Okay, make sense? So one of the things that I could do here, any pledge that is worth more than $100, I can have it assigned to me so that I can follow up on it. So I just click that button, and it's actually writing back into that list and sticking my name on the assigned to, so that nobody else can grab it. So everybody else would see that change on their dashboard, right? I don't know what's going on here. So again, very simple single page application. It's only using SP services and a bunch of JavaScript. Am I doing something up here? No? Okay. I don't think the cable's loose. Somebody didn't feed the hamsters. So let me show you a little bit about how that works. So I've kept this very, very simple. So basically I've dropped a content editor web part into the page, and all it does is load a bunch of script. So what I'm using for this thing is jQuery. jQuery, I'm using SP services because I love SP services and I use it for everything because of course it's my hammer, right? I have to use it. I'm using Moment, which is a JavaScript library that helps you work with dates and times. If you've ever done any date and time arithmetic in JavaScript, you really want to look at Moment.js. Has everyone used that before? Yeah? Don't ever do date time math yourself. Just give up. Use Moment. It's great. It's free. Perfect. Then I'm just loading a style sheet that I put together, my own CSS and then my own script file. Okay, so there's not a lot to this. And then the final thing in this file is that fundraiser pledges div, which is just a container into which I will pour my application. Okay, you did something similar yesterday, John. We plant a div somewhere so that we can control everything that goes inside of it, right? So that's the HTML file that I linked to in the content editor web part, and then this is the script, and it's about, what is it, 200 lines of script because it's not really doing a whole lot. So basically what I'm doing here, I'm still using JSON mapping here too, John, so I'm a little out of date. So the basic idea is that, I figure out who I am, I define me by calling SP services and getting the current user. I think I wrote this the first time on SharePoint 2010 and I copied it over to 2013. I use ShareGate a lot to move my demos and stuff around. ShareGate's a great product. Benjamin Nyland is here out in the vendor hall if you want to talk about his migration product. It's really, really nice. I use it to, like I said, move demos around. I use it in client work and stuff. I guess that's a plug, but I really like their product. So I moved this from 2010 into 2013 just because people seem to want to see things in 2013 now, regardless of whether it matters. So basically, I'm setting up here, defining some variables that I'll talk about in a minute. I create a table into which I'm going to put the pledges on that dashboard, right? And then I get the changes. So I have a function down here, get changes. Where is it? There it is. And what it's going to do is call a function, an operation in using SP services to get list item changes since token. Okay? This is a cool function because basically what it does is the first time you call it, without passing in a token, is that it passes you back the list schema as well as the data that matches your criteria. Okay? On subsequent calls, if you pass back the token that it has given you, it only passes you back the delta. So it only passes back items that have changed in some way. So for most of the time it'll pass back nothing unless you have a lot of activity. Okay? So I call get list item changes since token. Pass in some options. What's the query? I think I'm only showing pledges that have happened in the last day or something like that. That was up at the top. And I'll give you this. I'll make sure that you can get this code so you can pick it apart. So I look for the pledge changes. Once that's complete, I'm using the promises model here, so it doesn't hold things up. I create the table body. I sort of loop through and build out some table rows based on what data I get, and I poke it all into the table, into the page. So each time I get the changes, I'm basically sorry, it keeps going there all over the place. I'm really sort of refilling that entire dashboard, but you can't really tell because it's not a lot of data and it just sort of pokes it back in there. So it makes it seem like it's just sort of evolving as the data changes. And then I set up a timer basically here. I have a changes check variable, so I set an interval and I call that get changes function every 5 seconds. Okay. So it's not constant. It's not checking endlessly. It's every 5 seconds so that it feels relatively fresh and keeps moving. Okay. So that's what lets the changes happen on that dashboard. So if I write another one in here, Ella Fitzgerald, she's a little cheaper. She only gave us 50 bucks. So she'll pop up there, and because it's less than $50, I don't see that button. Okay. So again, very, very sort of real-time feeling activity. So it's a pretty simple example, but does it make sense as a single-page application? I mean, it's not real. I mean, this really doesn't accomplish much, but it does show you the basic ideas. You know, we're going to keep polling that list and make sure that any data changes are reflected there. Someone else, this would be great if I had a bunch of people in the audience who are pushing the Assign to Me button, because I'd see their names pop up, right? But you can see how it can become a very interactive experience with multiple people taking pledges, multiple people sort of managing the pledges as they come in. Okay, any questions about this one? Yeah?
Mark, how long would you guess it would take you to put one of those together from scratch? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I made this one up and I spent maybe a few hours on it. I mean, it wasn't, you know, pretty simple. The next one I'm going to show, which is a real application that I built for a client but sort of sanitized. We've been working on it now for 4 months probably, with a number of different versions. So, you know, it's not that this kind of development comes for free, but I still think our cycle time is much faster, right? You know, if we wanted to change what this table looked like, for instance, it's a very quick cycle time. You know, I change the markup a little bit, we refresh the page, bang, we're done, right? So I'm not sure that it always becomes the cheaper option or the faster option, but I think there are many times when faster is possible. I think I'm trying to answer a question you didn't actually ask. Okay, so let's any other questions about this one? Yeah.
If you have multiple users with that string open,
Yeah. Does it get?
It's the old shape.
Right, right. Well, every 5 seconds is actually an eternity to modern computers, right? I mean, there's a lot that can happen in that amount of time. Now, I'm not doing any sort of concurrency checking here. You know, if 2 of us grabbed a pledge, the last one would win. You can certainly build that in. But I think that in a sense, this is actually a much more efficient use of server resources. Because I'm asking for only a specific subset of data that may have changed, as opposed to refreshing the page. You know, the older model would be, you know, each person just sits there and refreshes their browser. So I think you actually gain some efficiency. And like I said, 5 seconds is actually a long time. I mean, you can tune that too. I mean, if you had 1,000 people, every 5 seconds might be too much, right? Does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? Okay. So that's the simpler of the 2 examples I want to show you. This is the more complicated one. I mentioned that application called Asana earlier. And this, so this client had, it's a consulting client. They are a consulting company, and they have what they call case teams, and those teams are working on projects. And those teams have to manage their work. This is all pretty complicated, right? So they have a set of tasks that they work on, and they need to make sure that those tasks get done. Very unusual work style. It's actually amazing how bad they are at that, though. And they were looking for a better tool set to help manage their tasks. What they did was it's one of those places where the consultants are allowed to pretty much do anything they want. Nobody stops them because they're the ones who have all the power. You know, they're revenue generators. But the IT people were freaking out because the consulting people were saying, you know, we found this Asana thing, we love it, we're going to start putting all of our work out there. And they work on stuff that's relatively confidential. You know, and there's a lot of intellectual capital and all that sort of stuff. So the IT folks wanted to move it in-house. So the sort of dumb goal of this was to make, by the way, the consulting people hate SharePoint. They've had SharePoint for years. They have 2007 running now. They're moving to 2013. I'm sorry, they have 2010 running now, and they're moving to 2013. But they didn't implement it well, and the consultants all think SharePoint sucks. And as Duck Size says, SharePoint doesn't suck, you suck. They just implemented it wrong. You know, they didn't do the right things to make it seem appealing to these consulting people. So this is one of the things they're trying to do to make it seem more appealing. You know, so part of this is about the user experience. They don't want the data to go outside the firewall. So they needed to come up with something inside the firewall that was compelling enough to prevent that from happening. Okay? So they brought me in to build this thing. I've cleansed it a bit, but you're basically seeing where we are as with it as an application. So the nice thing about Asana is it's a single-page application. It lets you do all of the work with your basket of tasks, your portfolio of work at the same time, right? You sort of see everything and can manipulate it. So we were trying to mirror that sort of an environment. So that's what we have here. Excuse me. So what we have here is a single page, and there's no reason for them ever to leave this page to manage the task for the project. They actually have a SharePoint site that has a link on the top that says task management. The home page is blank, except for one link that says task management, and they go to this page. Because they don't want them to think about the fact that it's SharePoint, because they don't like SharePoint, right? So I actually built this in SharePoint 2010, so it looks a little wonky under this resolution and with some CSS mistakes I made. But you know, I moved it to 2013 with ShareGate a couple days ago, and it just works. I mean, I didn't have to change any of the functionality. There was a little bit of CSS tuning because it was embarrassing, but I missed this. I can see, you know, that's hanging off the side. We may lose some data out that side. I'm not sure what's going to happen. It'll probably just flow right off that cliff. So the idea here is that you have all the tasks that are in the task list, and as you click on them, you get to see them on the right. Okay, now that's a big difference between working with a task list in a sort of native list view and this page, right? I mean, you'd agree that that alone makes it feel like you're sort of more present in what's going on. And anything you change here, you'll notice as I'm typing something, you know, if I'm changing something in that title, it's also changing it. There's a lot going on here, so sometimes I'm going to have to stop. But this title is also changing because when I'm typing here, it's the same task, right? So that's the data binding. That's what Knockout gives us, okay? I've got those two places on the screen bound to the same piece of data. So as I make those changes, I get to see them in all the places where that task shows up, okay? The other thing I've done is, now watch what happens when I hit tab here. Did you see the message up on the top? I scrolled a little too high. But we wanted to make it feel more fluid, okay? So I'm not doing any fancy messaging up there, but let me try it again. So I'll add a 5 there, I hit that. So that change is being written back to the task list immediately, okay? So there's no save button. There's no cancel button. So what you do is what you get, right? That's the way they wanted it to feel. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But instead of it feeling like you're working on a task as an object and then deciding what you want to do with that task object, you're working with the individual fields in that task, okay? And that's always being saved, so you know your browser crashes or whatever, you're all set. Another thing we wanted to do was give them, and sorry about the resolution. The resolution is actually making this look bad. I'm using the Tiny MCE editor. It's an open source rich text editor that's very controllable. I can decide exactly what buttons I want here, okay? And I've got bold, italic, horizontal rule, etc., right? So I've actually pared this way down from all the things that you can use. But it gives me the capability of doing stuff like this in a plain old text area on the page, okay? The SharePoint gives us a rich text editor that no one's all that wild about, right? And you can't really control it. You can do it server side, but you can't really decide which buttons are there, and you can't add your own buttons and things like that without doing a lot of work. So you notice it just saved it again, right? So the description just got written back. So I sort of have a toggle there where you can go from edit mode to view mode as you're moving around the page, either by double clicking or hitting that little pencil, right? Some of the details about the task they don't really want to see all the time. They sort of get in the way, so we use the jQuery UI accordion here. It shouldn't be that yellow, but it is right now. They also wanted to tag things. I think I've got some tags in here. I have a breakfast in there. Okay, so we have a list that contains tag values, and you can choose from them, or you can type a new one. So I don't think I have lunch in there. Oh, I do have lunch. We're already going to have lunch. How about dinner? So dinner's not in there, but if I hit tab now, dinner is a tag on this task, and it's also been written back into the list, so it's available for anyone else who wants to tag against that term. Now, they're using a set bunch of terms, this sort of taxonomy around their team's task management, right? So that list is something that they actually take rather seriously, and they don't add breakfast, lunch, and dinner to it. People pickers. Who loves people pickers? Nobody. No end user loves people pickers, right? Do you really? Come on. So I built my own little people picker. Really simple little people picker. Because we know everybody who's on the team, right? They're in a permission group. We don't want to pick from everybody who can use SharePoint. We're picking from people who are in this team at any given time. So it's just a little drop-down thing based on the membership of that team. And we're using them sort of like tags, right? But that felt a lot better to them. So we're basically removing all the SharePointiness from SharePoint and making it act more like this other application that they were interested in, so that they won't go there. And they love it, actually. They're using it. They've been using it for those 4 months or whenever we rolled out the first version. And it's really working well for them. And they don't complain about it. They ask us for new features, and we say, okay. And this is a lot more malleable than if we had tried to take SharePoint and make it behave our way, than sort of starting from scratch with this page. Let's see, one other thing I'd show you here. So if we mark a task as complete, watch the one on the right, or I'm sorry, your left. The one that's blue, that should disappear, right? So it actually gets removed from that list because right now that view is all outstanding tasklets. Tasklets is actually a variable. Don't want to call task, they want to call them projects. But another case team might want to call them something else. I don't know why they can't call them tasks, right? It actually is starting to evolve a little bit toward what a real task list actually does, but we're taking them there the way they want to go. So that's a good thing. So I can look at my task. These are the tasks that didn't work. I should be assigned to that one. Oh, I know why, because there are two roles that determine whether it's there, whether it's assigned to me or I am auditing it. So I'm actually auditing that one. So I'm the guy who's following up. I can create a new tasklet. I can also change the word tasklet if I go into the configuration list. So tasklet. And as soon as I tab out of that, and it's not assigned to me, so it's not showing up on that one. But you'll notice that it's right there. So as soon as I type the task, the title, I write it back in the list, get an ID number, and poke that back in the page. So now it's a real task. That's all we need for it to become a task. Okay? So all of this is going on in this one interface. We're not leaving anywhere. We don't have to go to the task list view. We don't have to change views. Well, we can change views here, but it's not loading another page. It's very fluid. This is using knockout observables to change the sorting and slicing and dicing. I can look at all of Dave's tasks by, go here. So if I click on Dave's name, I can filter down to him. If I click on it again, that goes away. I can look at all the breakfast tasks. I can take that away. I can filter. So show me the ones that say new. I can clear those filters. I can sort by header. So some of these things are things that a task list would normally give to you, but they feel a little bit different. I think they're a little bit more responsive. A lot of those, like if you do a filter, in 2013 it's still doing the postback on that, right? It's still doing the query string based filtering, right? So clunk, right? It's not doing that. So that's the idea. I'm trying to think if there are any other sort of little attachments. So I built my own little attachment engine. I know I have some documents on here somewhere. Where are they? Let's put a notebook up there. So that should, is that big? It's going to actually just upload it right now because I've put it in there. Doesn't seem to be working. I wonder if the internet decided to go away on me. So I'm using SP services there. There it goes. So now there's an attachment there, right? So it's there before I leave the page. If I want to do something like embed that link in the description for whatever reason, you know, I could upload a graph or something and stick the link to that in here. Again, sorry about that. So you can't do that when you're editing a list item because you don't know the link to the attachment until you save the item, and then you have to go back. So again, sort of a weird side benefit, right? Can delete the attachment. It's all sort of real-time stuff. That's not working. Trust me, that does usually work. You get the idea though, right? So how does all this work? You probably just want to see the code and have me shut up, right? All right, so it's not simple, but it's not horribly complicated either. So I've come up with a scheme here that's working out pretty well, sort of relatively recently. So I'm doing all the work in a site collection, a separate site collection. I have my own little dev site collection for this, the task management site collection. The site collection where the case team works is a separate one, okay? I've created a document library in the development site collection called app files. I'm building an app, right? This is an appless app. Just like you were talking about yesterday, I don't have Visual Studio. I don't even have it installed on my machine, but I'm building apps or applets or applications or something, right? I know, evil. So we've had several versions of this thing, but this version, 1.3.1, is the first one where I'm building using this sort of deployment scheme. The other ones are there just sort of for historical record. So I have something called an app loader, okay? And I actually embed just this stuff in a content editor web part off in the destination, or the place that's going to consume the application or run it, okay? So this just goes into content editor web part. All I'm loading in that content editor web part is jQuery, SP services, and a library called lab.js. Lab.js is really cool because it's going to, you'll see here that I'm loading a script using it here, all right? That's just one script, so that's nothing different than what you could do with a script tag or a script link, okay? Doing a couple other things here, just making sure we're not in design mode, because if we're editing the page, we don't really want to load the application, but other than that, it's pretty simple. And then the, so that HTML file is going to load the app loader. I'm sorry, the app loader JavaScript. See, the app loader JavaScript is going to set up a namespace for the application, task management. Start to define some things around that in that namespace. I'm trying to namespace all of my variables that actually matter sort of across what's going on. And then the only thing that this app loader is going to do is open this task management config list and read a bunch of stuff that tells it what to do next. Okay? I'll show you what that list looks like. Working on it. So I'm just storing some configuration stuff in there, right? You know, what's the team name? What's the name of the permissions group that has the team members? There's a managers group because we actually want to send some emails to managers every once in a while. The most important thing at this point, though, is what version of the application am I going to load, right? So I'm going to load 1.3.1 demo. That's the other one. Okay, so once I've read that stuff out, then I can decide, well, you know, let me come up with what the HTML file name is that I want to load based on what version I'm trying to load. Okay, and basically it's going to point to the right folder in this site collection. Make sense? So then. Inside that versions folder, I have a version loader HTML, right? That's the one that's going to load next. Now this one is the one where a lot of the real meat of this thing is. The first thing that it does is load a bunch of HTML that is the template for the application itself. And it's relatively complicated in this case because there's a lot of data binding going on. But it's also a bunch of divs and spans and things that you recognize if you've ever done any HTML work, right? So this is the outer container. There are some templates that are contained in script tags. That's the way you do it for Knockout, right? And a bunch of data binding things in there. So basically a lot of the HTML, all the HTML that's going to go on the page as it loads. And then some script down at the bottom where I'm loading all of the other files I need in order to make that application work. And this is going to be version specific, right? So the CSS for that version, the script for that version. So the HTML for the version is at the top, the script for the version is at the bottom. And this is also where I'm using lab.js. So I want to dynamically decide what those files ought to be based on those parameters that I've loaded before. So I want to load based on the version root. That's where I want to load tinymcd from, etc. Right? So it dynamically figures out what version to load. If we wanted to go back a version, we just change that one parameter in the list. And as long as the list structures haven't changed, we can figure out how to manage that. We can load the new version. What time am I supposed to be done? Soon? Yeah? Okay. So we load a bunch of stuff, and then this is the JavaScript file that actually does all of the work. We're going to go out and we're going to get the task list. So I've created a separate library, and this is I talked about a little bit that ways to sort of prepare for using something other than SP services. I've put all of the data access pieces in this jQuery-ified set of data access methods. So I have a tasks read all function, okay? So I could later replace this with a REST call if I decide that I want to use REST instead of SP services, right? So I'm abstracting things out enough so that I'm not future-proofing myself, but I'm at least thinking it through, right? So when I call this task management tasks read all function, I'm just going to do whatever's inside here. So if I change that to REST later, it'll just work. I have to make sure the data comes back the same way and things like that, but you can see that I'm sort of trying to prepare myself for the day that SP services might not be there. So I have a bunch of functions there that I'm using to get data. I'm going to get those task tags. That's a separate list. There are 4 lists that drive this. Tasks, task tags, task comments. There's commenting on there. Didn't show you that. Commenting on items isn't available in any sort of consistent way, so I built my own little commenting engine. Not a big deal. You just type something at the bottom and it gets saved into a separate list that's linked to the task list item. And then I have so when the page loads, I make sure I've got all of the data, and then I apply the bindings for the knockout template. Okay, but this one line is where sort of all of the magic happens from a knockout standpoint. It's where all of the data from the arrays and things that I've built up from the data access calls get sort of bound and filled into the HTML that we've loaded. And I can't possibly go through all of this line by line or anything. But there's a decent amount of logic in here that makes all of this work and manages the interactions that people have with that page. But it's all contained in this one file, and it makes some logical sense, and you can see there's a lot of it. But I'm building up capabilities that we can then use for other single-page applications of this client. So, for instance, for those of you who've worked with Knockout before, you build custom bindings. So my little people picker thing is a custom binding that I can then use on some other page. There's a date picker on there for the due date. So I've got a little custom binding that uses jQuery UI's date picker that I could use as a sort of a common function for another application. So we're building up a set of capabilities that we can start to use, and the next application that we might build would be a lot faster, right? So we're building up those piece parts that we might use for application 2 and 3 and 4, and I'm hoping they'll be there because I think this is working out really well for them. So like I said, there's a lot of complexity to this one, and I can't really take you through all of it because it would be even more boring than I've been so far. So maybe I'll stop here and let you ask questions, and then I can, if I have any time left, I can steer in the directions that you want to go. Yeah?
It obviously doesn't look SharePoint, right? So
Yeah.
do you get any sort of pushback to say, well, this is a very different looking UI, so it's not really consistent, and maybe
Yeah.
it doesn't fit in with the corporate scheme. It's okay, it's SharePoint, but at least it's consistent.
Yeah. Actually, I'm the one who's the most worried about that. I am worried about it because, when you don't use the people picker, but they have to use the people picker everywhere else, then are you doing them a favor? And usually the answer there would be no. It's a sort of unique situation because these case teams are not using SharePoint. They refuse to use SharePoint, right? So we're trying to get them to see that SharePoint itself isn't the problem, right? We're trying to get them to see that there's a platform here that we can give them good capabilities on. And then we're going to have to figure out a way or the folks who have hired me are going to have to figure out a way to sort of wean them over into using SharePoint for real, I think. So this is a very weird one. I'm usually very careful about, with SP services, I tried to be very careful when I'm putting markup into the page. I use the same classes that the page uses and stuff because I don't want it to look jarringly different. So I'm with you. I actually do worry about that. If you come up with some whiz-bang people picker or something and everyone likes it better, well, how do you put it everywhere? You can't. I mean, that wouldn't be realistic. Yeah.
It's a quick one on the people picker. The 2013 Microsoft has released a component.
Right.
But it won't work.
Right. Yeah, and this is actually, I'm building this on 2010, so obviously I would have looked at that. But it feels sort of like the same people picker, right?
Yeah.
It's the 2013.
It looks and feels like the 2013 one, but you can use it in your own.
Right. And the 2013 one, I think, is, from a user experience perspective, quite a bit better. It's not a lot different, but it's enough different. It sort of feels a little bit less clunky than the older ones. Yeah, so that's why I'm not doing that. Other question? So I sort of showed you a relatively simple sort of fake single-page application, and then one that I built for real that's actually quite complicated. So you can see that you can really take this idea anywhere you want to go. The fact that you're in SharePoint doesn't really matter. I've left a lot of the Chrome of SharePoint's Chrome around this single-page application with the task management thing, but I just as easily with CSS could hide most of it. There are all kinds of people go to all kinds of different extremes to try to make things disappear. Like how do we make the sweet bar go away? A little CSS will just make it disappear. It'll be there when the page loads, but it'll go away. And I actually think that, let me see, let me go back to that page. So I've actually got the quick launch on that page, and when this page loads, yeah, you see how it just disappeared, right? So I didn't work too hard to build a page that didn't have the quick launch. I just get rid of it in CSS, right? Bang. So, yeah, that's a little bit of a clunky page load, but since they just sit on that page, it doesn't really bother them that much. So you have a lot of different opportunities of how to think about this. I could also make everything above go away, but we want them to be aware that they're in SharePoint, but not feel like they're in SharePoint. Again, sort of a strange. I don't think I've ever been in this particular situation before. All right. Well, if nobody has any more questions, I think I'm out of time. Thanks for coming. And I'll be up here for a while if you do think of anything.